What has your career taught you about the role of diplomacy in foreign affairs?
Diplomacy is essentially the way to try to advance the national interest without fighting wars. And we have learned, especially I would say over the last 20 years, that there are many major international issues to which there is no military solution. We were 20 years in Afghanistan trying to create a sustainable governmental and security structure there, and we were unable to do so. And the way that Iraq is developed is not the way that we expected or wanted it to develop. So that's what can happen if you try to use military power in order to accomplish what should be accomplished through diplomacy. The second aspect is, I think a lot of us think that the right way to deal with the outside world is to have a skillful diplomacy backed up by credible military power. But the military power should be in the back, not in the front. And we sometimes get that backwards. And I think that's one of the deficiencies in America's diplomacy. Because when you have sufficient military power to be able to alter an outcome, if your diplomacy fails, then there's a tendency to resort to it anyway. Other countries have to depend on their diplomacy in order to advance their national interests. We have two options. One is diplomacy and one is military power. And too often, we skimp the diplomacy and use the military power to get what we want. But we discover that we can't get what we want if we use military power where it's not the appropriate instrument for accomplishing our national goals. So in my experience, we are capable of stunningly effective diplomacy when we put our mind to it. And we have the professional diplomats who have the experience, the language skills, and the desire to improve our relations with foreign countries and to overcome difficult issues in the process. But we don't always use those people as effectively as we could. I find it stunning that our military, which is the best in the world, is the only entirely professional part of the U.S. government. We don't have political appointees as generals. We're just mourning the passage of Colin Powell, who is an example of a senior military officer who had the professionalism and the humanity and the integrity to gain the respect and confidence of all of our senior leaders, whether in Democratic or Republican administrations. And so I consider Colin Powell to be an example of the best in our military. And it's a totally professional service from top to bottom. And our diplomatic service is not, because 40% of the top positions do not go to our general equivalents. They go to political appointees. And the political appointees come in, and some are good and some are bad. But whatever they learn goes back to the private sector instead of remaining in the government to bulk up our experience in knowing how to address foreign policy issues successfully.
Do you have any insights from serving under two different administrations and having to make those types of adjustments?
when you serve in the Foreign Service, you work for the United States. And it doesn't matter who is in office. You want whatever president is in office to be successful, and you want that president to be helpful in advancing the interests of the United States. And I never encountered in the near half century that I was in the Foreign Service, I never encountered a civil servant or a Foreign Service officer who didn't basically have that attitude. So this suspicion of civil servants on the part of political appointees in Washington, in my experience, is totally unjustified. And in well-run embassies, and in ones that I've served in, and in ones that I've headed, one of the most heartwarming features is that you can have multiple agencies of the U.S. government pulling together as one team to try to advance U.S. interests without any of the departmental and petty rivalries that take place in Washington, D.C. And I found it was that way in China in spades. As an example, the political section worked hand in hand with our defense attaché office to produce an intelligence analysis that was so good that it was incorporated word for word. Portions of it were incorporated word for word into a national intelligence estimate in Washington. You don't get that type of cooperation in Washington, and yet we were able to produce that in our overseas missions. So we are accustomed to working for whoever's in charge in Washington. So that does not, you can have your own personal views on politics, but it doesn't spill over into your desire to see the America successful. And that is the motivating inspiration for our civil servants abroad and frankly in Washington. At least that's been my experience. So that wasn't a problem. But you do have a problem because you have to be as skillful a diplomat in dealing with Washington as you do in dealing with your own, with the host government where you're serving as ambassador. There are personalities in Washington. I knew all of the top officials in the Bush administration. I didn't know them in the Clinton administration. So you have to be careful how you address issues, and you have to maintain support, because diplomacy is a competitive business. You have to always remember that the other country has their ambassador in Washington. And if that ambassador is more successful in gaining the confidence of your government as a channel for communication with his government, then you're going to be cut out. And so you have to be sure that you retain the confidence of your own government as the channel for communications with the foreign government to which you're accredited. And that takes work. And it's one reason why generally you have to visit Washington periodically in order to renew acquaintances there. And it's also useful to go up and talk to people in Congress and get their attitudes, so you can be armed to know better how to represent the administration successfully in dealing with the country where you're accredited.
Is your childhood what made you interested in working in China?
My experience in China got me interested in high school and in college in international relations. I did not join the Foreign Service because I was interested in China. I joined the Foreign Service because I was interested in international relations and learning the art of dealing with foreign countries. Within the Foreign Service, I was interested in getting assignments in China, but many of my assignments were not in China, and I was quite comfortable with that. So I don't think you should join the Foreign Service because of interest in a particular country, because you really have to be available for assignment wherever the service needs you to serve.